Hello, my name is Justin the Clue, and I'm here today with
Will Sloan.
And you're listening to the Important Cinema Club. And today, we're getting real. We're talking about documentaries, and we're talking about the king of the doc, Freddie Wiseman.
Frederick Wiseman, the great documentary filmmaker, the godfather of direct cinema, the man, and you say that this is the Important Cinema Club. Well, have I got important topics for you?
Oh boy.
School. The art gallery, the police station, hospitals, juvenile courts, welfare offices, Central Park.
La Comédie Française.
Yes, the crazy horse striptease dancers. All the most important subjects have been in front of his mighty camera.
And does he judge? Nay, he just presents it as it is. Or does he?
I think he judges just a little bit.
Oh, okay.
And if he encourages you to judge, isn't that close enough?
When you're talking about docs, you're talking about Mr. Michael Moore. And then after that, you're talking about the god of docs, Frederick Wiseman.
Probably the exact opposite of Michael Moore.
You're pretty much almost 100%. Frederick Wiseman does not impose himself on his cinema. He does not question his cinema. He just documents his cinema. And the way that he edits it, he said himself that he edits it to reflect his own experiences and what he learned by going through these things, but he doesn't want to impose anything very bluntly to his audience.
He picks a subject, usually an institution, like, say, the National Gallery in London or the New York Public Library or any 30 other topics. He goes there for anywhere from a few weeks to a few months, takes 100 hours of footage, many hours of footage.
And he said himself that he doesn't actually do much research when he goes and does his doc, because when he's there, he wants to be able to document anything that he sees. Because he hates the idea of doing research at a location and he sees something interesting happening and he doesn't have his camera to record it.
And he has no thesis going in either. Although I would suggest that he develops a thesis as he goes along.
He said that he actually develops the thesis principally while he's editing the film. But he does watch the rushes at the end of every night, and he does talk with his cameraman, who's usually his only other collaborator when he's shooting these docs, about what they should get, what angles or what scenes they need to be able to tell the story fully.
And you mentioned that he doesn't impose himself on the subject. He doesn't use any narration. He doesn't use
subtitles.
He doesn't use non-diegetic music. And I think what's so fascinating about him is, despite all this, he does communicate ideas. He just doesn't insist upon those ideas.
Well, they just kind of hang there, that when you're trapped with the people that he's documenting, and he's always documenting institutions. That's his thing. That, like all the things that we said, school, even like ballet or the library, these are institutions, and he sees how they run, and he kind of wants the audience to get their own meaning out of it, even though that, he's editing it in a way that he has an idea of what that meaning is.
So here's an example. One of my favorite examples from one of his movies that I've seen. It's the end of EX Libris, the New York Public Library, which was his film from 2017. The last two scenes of the movie, the second last scene, this is a documentary that chronicles the New York Public Library from the Bronx to the Battery. Everything about the library is in it. It's over 3 hours long. Second last scene, it's a library in, I think, Harlem, very small library. An entirely black community group is there, most of them parents, talking about the sort of things that are being taught in their textbooks.
And how important it is as well for the library institution to exist, to be able to help students learn stuff.
Because they're talking about the way that slavery is talked about in textbooks. They talk about them as servants, but they were actually slaves, or they were brought over. What does brought over mean? I don't know. It's been a while since I've seen it. I can't remember the exact terminology. And then the conversation keeps going. They start talking about gentrification in the neighborhood. So that's the second last scene. The last scene is at the 42nd Street branch, the big library branch. It's this lecture on classical music, and it's a very well-heeled crowd. And, this is a movie where we've seen, like, celebrities come to the library. We've seen people, like, reading audiobooks for the blind. We've seen people learning how to do Braille. We've seen so much sharing and so much community building. And these last two shots, he's able to communicate this very nuanced message. The way I interpret it is, the library can be many things. Here are two things the library does. They're both good. They're both wonderful. One of them is under threat. And one of them is essential and very important. And the other one is a luxury. And it would be wonderful to have both of these, but one of them's under threat.
That speech is such a perfect encapsulation of like what I hate about those kind of speeches, which is someone reading something in a very calm, mannered voice, and the sound being like muffled, like it's perfect sound, so it's never too high, it's never too low, it just kind of hangs there, and there's no excitement going on. Well, compare that to earlier in the film, where someone is giving a lesson on communism to a class of like 10 people, and she is so energized, and she is so involved in what's going on, and it shows that the library system does both these things.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, once you get to a certain level, you don't use slides anymore like that. You're not standing in front of those slides. But I think one of them is more important and more interesting than the other, but they both exist. And as the documentary says themselves, the more rich people that invest, the more the city will put money into the library, which will then allow the administrative branch to funnel it to places that actually need money.
Right. We see so many board meetings and so many meetings of the bureaucrats of the library who are talking about, like, the library is not immune from capitalism, right?
Yeah, I mean, it matters where the money goes or how it's perceived that money is used. And you'll notice that, like, all the wealthy people, when they have meetings, they talk about how the library is a conduit to imagination and, like, how important that is and creativity, when for other people, it is essential building blocks to life that will affect them for all time. And that it's a public space where all of these things are available. But at the top, it's people who, they don't need this, but it does represent something for them that they see as important, and as long as that can, you know, spread out, it's one way to get to what needs to be done.
You know, another example of the way that he uses editing in that same movie is it opens with Richard Dawkins at the 42nd Street branch, and he's giving, you know, his usual speech about, I think atheists are as much of a voting bloc as Christians are, and we need to become mobilized. And you hear that and you think, oh yeah, okay, this is what the library is. It's all these all these
windbags,
friggin' liberals, you know. But then the second shot is in some poorer neighborhood, like poor school children using the library as a resource.
Yes, building robotics and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And yeah,
those things juxtaposed together says something.
And that's very important to consider in Frederick Wiseman's documentaries, is that he's not just like capturing these images and putting them in chronological order, even though that he said himself that he will not move stuff around in a scene to try to like tell a different story. He does compress everything, and you don't notice it when you watch it, but he'll compress like an hour into like a 3-minute sequence to give you an idea of that, but it'll feel so natural, and he's so good at it that you feel as if like you're just watching it in one go.
And now that he's using digital, he will increasingly though let himself just go on and on. We both watched his recent film in Jackson Heights about the Jackson Heights neighborhood in Queens, and there's this like centerpiece scene that's just at this small local business where a bunch of business owners, all of them non-white, they're speaking Spanish, have collected to talk about this new business improvement district that's going to be built and that people are going to be able to vote for. And they're trying to mobilize the community against it, and they're trying to figure out how to do it. And there's this one guy who gets up and he just delivers this, I swear, 10 or 15 minute monologue about gentrification, how it works, how the city tricks people in the community into thinking this is a good thing for them, and how to stop it. And it just goes on and on and on. And it's incredible that he just lets it go on and on, you know?
Well, you know, when you're teaching something, people don't usually absorb like new information or new knowledge that's just given bluntly to them because their first reaction is to rebel against it. But if you're trapped and you're listening to someone speak in that way, there's a better chance that you kind of absorb it. And I think something like in Jackson Heights, the fact that it is 3 hours, number one, you look at it and you're like, oh my God, it looks like so much work. But it's 3 hours because it's documenting all these different facets of this community, which is like one of the most multicultural places in America. And it's important to see all of these slices and all these communities all speaking different languages and doing different things. At the same time, there is that through line of gentrification through all of it and how this impacts all of these people's lives.
And it sneaks up on you, the fact that this is the through line. You don't quite grasp it immediately.
There's actually one recurring character who are the, I guess, community organizers, and you see them in the background of those shots because they organize the meetings and they try to get the people to go up against this stuff.
And, you know, he doesn't impose himself because nothing is really simple in his movies. There's no one idea. There's no one simple thing. In Jackson Heights, the community is so diverse, which means there's a big trans community, there's a big gay community, there are homophobic people, you know? There are people from many different income levels, and they all coexist in this like stew together. You know, politicians come in and out. There's no one thing that this community is. Like, it would be too simple for him to paint it as this is this wonderful example of diversity. I mean, it is.
Yeah. That will disappear in 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, and there are tensions here, too. Like, nothing... And, you know, we also see in one of his early movies, High School, like, for the most part, it depicts the high school as being this sort of fascist hellscape. But it's not just a fascist hellscape. There's like... There are teachers who are trying. There are teachers who are more fascist than others.
Let's say the buzz-cutted dean of discipline, who has one of the, I think, the quintessential Frederick Wiseman scene is him punishing the kid who, like, walked away and talked back to a teacher.
Yeah.
And, I mean, Frederick Wiseman, I read an article that he wrote about how he makes his movies, and he says, like, you know, you still have to have humor in what you're showing. Like, that's important. You can't just be showing, like, the facts. And sometimes the humor is not obvious to the people that are going through the scene, but it's obvious to the viewer, where this kid has to come to this dean of discipline, who Frederick Wiseman, when he learned that it was a job that existed, was like, what could that possibly be?
Dean of discipline.
Yeah. And this like buzz-cutted jackass that just because he doesn't like the kid's attitude at one point, he's like, you got the tension. The kid's like, what? Like, I don't understand.
Yeah, and there's another character, or is it the same character, who says, well, you know, being an individual is okay, but there are places to be an individual.
I don't know if it's him, but that sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like Frederick Wiseman, at one point, there's a shot that everyone's discussed where the camera like zooms in on like a young girl's posterior as she's doing sports. But then he compares that later on to like them telling a woman like, you cannot wear shorts that are this short.
Yes.
It's not just like ogling a young girl, it's commenting on both these things.
Yeah, because she's wearing that in gym class, where that's the actual gym uniform, and they're doing these like dances that they have to do in gym class. And elsewhere in the documentary, there's a fashion show.
Oh my God.
Which is very hard to watch, where the teacher who's running the fashion show is just mercilessly criticizing.
And she's like, oh, she's a little heavy, but she knows it. And it's like, oh my God.
These girls are like cruelly sexualized from a young age. And then later, a gynecologist comes to lecture the school on proper sexual hygiene, and you know, he's going on about, now remember, the more sexual partners you have, the less capable of intimacy you'll be. So,
and aren't they broken up as well by like gender, because you can't have both of them talking in a sex ed class, because oh boy, they had to learn what's going on at the opposite sex. Catastrophe.
Well, you know, High School was made in 1968, a pretty key year, and the high school we see in the movie feels like this stifling place, this fortress almost. There's this teacher who almost like makes it his job to go through the halls and check to see if people have their hall passes.
Yeah.
Just a fucking SS guard, basically.
Just these people who have considered themselves failures at life, so the only way they can find any satisfaction is by cracking down on these teens and making sure that they follow these specific rules that exist for some reason.
So it feels like this prison where kids are programmed to be good, willing subjects. And yet 1968 keeps like peering through the walls, like you hear about Martin Luther King.
Oh, or the very fiery conversation where a teacher brings up like race in a class, and there's like a black student at the front surrounded by white students.
Like the black student has no other students around him. And then there's that other class where, you know, the teacher is like, well, how many of you would join an organization? God. You know, let's just say, no wrong answers. How many would join an organization that has a sizable minority of black people in it?
And like almost no hands raised.
Well, but then some hands start to raise, and then a few others. It's like you can kind of tell like, what is acceptable in this room.
So
right?
uncomfortable, yeah. And at the same time, it ends with such like a sad scene that I almost feel Frederick Wiseman when he's like filming it. He knows what he's getting. A teacher is reading a note that someone who was sent to Vietnam wrote. And it's essentially like, thank you for making me the man that I am. I have to go do this job now. I think there's actually a line where he's like, I'm just a body and I have a job to do. And they're like, we did such a good job.
Yeah.
We destroyed any sense of self. And now he is just a puppet of the state to be murdered and or murder innocent people as he goes to this unjust war.
I liked the poetry teacher who tried to use Simon and Garfunkel to make poetry come alive. I thought that was nice.
Yeah, hello, fellow teens. I mean, you gotta do something, right? And Wiseman captures all of this, again, with his kind of like camera at the back, filming what's going on. People always ask, do you think that behavior changes when you put a camera on these people? And Wiseman is the first to say that, like, well, you have to have a bullshit detector to see, these people are just acting for camera. But the thing is that people go through their day and day just being themselves. People are not that good actors. He talks about one of the documentaries that he made where there's a scene where a bunch of prostitutes were grabbed by police officers, and one of them is grabbed by the police officer and choked out for 20 seconds, and then he just lets her go. And the police officer did it as like a show of force to say, like, hey, if you step out of line, this is what's going to happen to you. And Wiseman said, like, the police officer didn't think he was doing anything wrong. Like, this is what he did every day. So that the fact that it happened in front of the camera or not didn't mean anything to him, because that is his worldview. So, like, Wiseman is capturing these worldviews, and I mean, some of them are terrible, like this police officer, and a lot of them just, they'll go about their day because Wiseman is just there for so long.
People probably just got used to him, right? Although I do think that teacher who is, like, patrolling the halls, checking people's hall passes, probably thought he looked pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, but that's the best thing, right? Because that's his worldview. He doesn't have any perspective about how much of a terrible monster that he actually is.
Yeah.
We've kind of been working our way backwards to Wiseman's first feature-length film.
And probably still his most famous, I think.
Yeah, even though it was banned for 25 years.
Isn't that crazy?
Cannibal Apocalypse. Well, I mean, reading up on why it was banned, and we're talking about, are we going to say the name correctly? TITICUT FOLLIES?
TITICUT FOLLIES.
Which is a documentary about a mental institution. I don't have the name in front of me.
It's I've got it here. It's Bridgewater State Hospital in Bridgewater, Massachusetts.
And so Wiseman at the time, before he made this documentary, was working as a law professor, and he would take students to the mental asylum to just show them like this fucking hellscape and what it's like to actually send someone there. And he befriended the people that worked there, and he decided, why don't I make a documentary if I just follow kind of the day in, day out of this institution. And I don't know exactly what he wanted to do with it, or what the people thought like was going to come out of it. But again, we're talking about worldviews, right? Where what they do every day does not seem bad to them because they do it every day. But when you suddenly present it just bare, holy shit, what a nightmare this place is.
I mean, some of the things we see, there's an inmate who is force-fed, through his nose. And this is intercut, actually. I mean, it's his first movie, so there are certain things that he does that are a little out of character for him.
Yes, where he compares and contrasts two scenes, but he's intercutting between them.
Right.
Which he never does in his later work.
So we see this guy being horrifically force-fed this food, and then it keeps cutting back to the same guy now dead later, and his body being prepared for burial.
And the comparison between both of them is that when he's being force-fed, they're doing it so nonchalantly. Yeah. One of them's like, hey, could you get me some coffee over there? And he's like smoking, and he's like, don't choke back, don't choke back. And when he's being prepared for burial, it's like very mannered and soft. He's being treated better dead than he ever was when he was alive and trapped in this mental institution for like 15 years.
But we see the guards, bullying some of the people who are institutionalized. We see that a lot of the inmates have been stripped of their clothes. Or
they're just in a room with nothing. They keep them naked at all times for their own benefit. But all the guards do when they walk is like tease them and make fun of them. One of the inmates, they just say like, hey, you make sure to keep your room clean, until the inmate reacts in anger. And then it reveals that the inmate lives in a room with nothing. And it's just the guard teasing him or just torturing him for the guard's own amusement.
And the movie is bookended by shots of the TITICUT FOLLIES, which are this like annual talent show that they put on with the inmates, which is also horrific.
Yes. I mean, one of the through lines through the film is like an inmate who's like, I don't want to be here. Like, I feel better. Like, I was in jail, you brought me here. I feel so much, like, worse. This is destroying me. Please, like, just let me, like, go. Like, bring me back to jail or just let me out. and it's almost like a Kafkaesque play.
It's making it worse.
Yeah, and like the doctors are like, yeah, and the doctors are like giving him nothing, like he's not listening to him. And there's one scene where he's talking to a whole board, then he leaves and the board's like, well, he's obviously suffering from paranoid delusions and we're gonna have to up his medication.
It's interesting that Wiseman chooses to start the movie after the Follies scene. He starts it with this extended interview between one of the people who works there and one of the new inmates who was a child molester and in fact assaulted his own 11-year-old daughter. I mean, Wiseman doesn't tell you what to think of this, but there's something about the placement of it so early in the movie. It's almost as if he's saying, here's like the worst that society can produce. This is like, you're not like, this is an absolute like abject human. And now we're going to show you that even people like this
don't deserve to be treated like this.
Yeah.
He never says what any of the people did, and you get like hints here or there, but it's essentially just like human beings being tortured every day in, day out, stripped of any dignity or sense of self, and just ridiculed by these guards who, these people are not people to them anymore. They're just annoyances, like farm animals that they have to deal with every day and are doing what they just wish they would go and do.
It's so abstract. Like it is like farm animals. Like they're dehumanized.
Yes.
And, you alluded to the fact earlier that this movie was banned for 25 years, which is because, it played at the New York Film Festival and a couple other places, but the state of Massachusetts was actually able to get a court order against it.
Using a law they had never actually enforced ever, which was that the inmates didn't have the right state of mind to sign any waivers to appear in this film.
And some of the things we see, it's kind of a bullshit case, but on the other hand, it's like, I kind of get it.
Well, I get why they wouldn't want it to appear, because it makes this look like a horror show that it is.
Yeah.
But the fact that they would rather bury it, and I'm sure they did nothing at the mental institution and just let it run the way that it was.
But some of the things, some of the positions we see people in this movie, it's like, if you were in your right mind, would you want yourself... I'm not siding with the state of Massachusetts.
Yeah, you're like, listen, the state is correct of how they do things.
I'm just saying, like, there is enough ambiguity here to make it that they
any rational, not like in the pocket of the state judge would be like, this isn't this has no like legal leanings, and this movie can be seen. But that's not what happened. It got buried essentially for 25 years, where the only people that could see it were doctors or medical students who requested it directly.
Until the early 90s, when it was finally released to the public.
But thankfully, Frederick Wiseman, or Freddie Wiseman, as I've said to his friends, high school really was able to like lift him off, and he was able to make documentaries from that point on.
He's 89 years young now.
Still making docs.
His last movie was Monroeville, Indiana in 2018. And, it just breaks my heart that we're probably not going to have him for much longer.
Have you watched all of the films yet?
Well, no.
Yeah, so there's tons to discover. Because he's a guy that like could not stop working. I mean, he has something like 30, 50 feature films about all kinds of subjects.
I just love that he's out there,
And that all this stuff is being documented. And the fact that like there was never any funding body that he had to work with other than like PBS, or every now and then he'd get a grant. But he talks about how proud he was to work very independently, that he worked with a distributor on his early films and they, withheld money. So he figured out ways he could just do it himself. And if you want his films, you have to get it directly from him. And you probably can't pay it because they usually go to schools and libraries.
And Canopy, I think, has a lot
Canopy
of them.
has all of his films. So if you have a library account, get on Canopy and you can watch it there. Unless Canopy is bad. I don't know. Twitter's telling me all sorts of things.
And I think the one that I would start with is the New York Public Library.
Really? You wouldn't start with high school? That sweet 84 minutes versus the 3 hours?
You're right. High school is a sweet 84 minutes. But I think if you just devote an afternoon to the New York Public Library and you really sit with it, you'll have a wonderful time.
Reading some essays about Frederick Wiseman's work, one person says that like Wiseman doesn't make films to show joy. If there's joy in his films, it's usually like near the tail end where it's an individual can go and get that. And, that the institution, whether like maybe they help them a little bit, but usually it's them being able to find their own independence or finding something in their own pocket of time. New York Library, or Ex Libris, is filled with joy because it's people that actually want to be doing these things, and even the institutional bodies actually are working towards a, universal goal as opposed to a capitalist one.
Well, there was also a scene in Jackson Heights that I found very moving, which is just at a laundromat where where there were like two people doing a little concert
Yes.
with like a xylophone, and there was a whole crowd there. And it's just like his later movies particularly have moments like this where it's just like, just something nice to help you muddle through life, you know?
Yeah, exactly. This is miserable. Corporations will crush us. We'll have nothing. We'll all live in condos. But, sometimes there'll be a little bit of music. That can make you happy. Yeah. So as per usual, you can send us letters at importantcinemaclubpodcast@gmail.com. You can rate and review us on, I guess it's Apple Podcasts. I don't think they call it iTunes anymore.
Really?
So yeah, we got 2 this month. So thank you very much to the people who did that.
How long has it not been iTunes?
I don't know, but I listened to, NPR, and they're like, rate and review us on Apple Podcasts.
Gee whiz.
Yep. And we're all over the place now, too. You can listen to us on Spotify. We're up there. So no excuse. You should be listening to us 24/7. We have enough episodes. But if you listen to all of them, we have a Patreon one this week. And what are we talking about, Will?
Speaking of direct cinema, we are looking at D.A. Pennebaker's groundbreaking documentary about Bob Dylan, Don't Look Back.
So does this mean we have a full-on Bob Dylan episode where I question you about your love of Dylan?
Are we both bitter that he went electric? Who knows?
Does one of us prefer his Christian music to everything else? I mean, you're going to have to listen to the episode. $5 a month, you'll get that one, our whole back catalog, and all sorts of goodies. Commentary tracks for public domain movies you can watch at home, including the recently released Detour from the Criterion Collection.
Yeah, sync it up to your Criterion Blu-ray.
Because there's no goddamn commentary on that Blu-ray.
We made Detour.
Yeah. We did the commentary, and then a few weeks later, Criterion announced that they're releasing the Blu-ray.
Trend hoppers.
Yep. All right, so what are we doing next week, Will?
Well, we wanted to do something kind of far away from Frederick Wiseman. We wanted to have all the colors of the rainbow in this podcast. So we are investigating the short but brilliant career of Pauly Shore.
Wait. Pauly Shore? The weasel himself?
Yes, and you probably are listening to this and you're thinking, that's a joke. No.
Nope. Well, it got brought up as a Patreon episode topic, and I went, there's too much to explore there. Encino Man, Biodome, In the Army, Jury Duty, Son-in-Law.
And who could forget his meta movie,
Pauly Shore is Dead.
which is really what sold me on this episode.
What about Politics? The stand-up special that he did.
I watched a bit of his interview with Herman Cain, and I was disappointed.
Oh, okay. I mean, you've already uncovered some pathetically sad footage of him doing a stand-up set.
Oh, I watched
so dark.
I watched 5 minutes of him on Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
Also dark.
Boy. And we already met somebody, just mentioning this episode, that has 2 autographed items by Pauly Shore.
Oh man, we're burning all our good content.
I know.
So,
but was Pauly Shore important for you? Right, but give him a hint of taste.
No.
But he was omnipresent when we were kids, right?
Oh yeah.
Biodome. Can't wait to revisit. And by that, I mean I'm scared.
Ugh.
But that'll be us next week. Don't, me. You're excited to dive into the shoreness.
Yeah. Let's do it.
All right. So until then, I'm Justin Gloop.
I'm Will Sloan.
Thanks for listening.
Speaking of Pauly Shore, we watched another reviled comedy from the 90s last week.
Starring from someone who could essentially star in one of our failed comedian or feature film comedian episodes, Mr. Martin Short.
Well, we say failed comedian.
Oh, but he's successful.
He was in tons of movies. Pure Luck, Captain Ron, Father of the Bride Parts 1 and 2.
Yeah, that's right. And he's good friends with Steve Martin, so we can go on tour with him. And he's considered one of the nicest comedians around. He's the comedian of comedians, as articles about him would say.
You know, I've always felt fondly towards Martin Short, but
me too. You're where is Hidden Gems is what you think.
Yeah, but I'm thinking, when has he ever made me laugh?
I mean, you went to go see a concert with your mom of Martin Short, didn't you?
This is true. Back when I was working at the Woolwich Observer newspaper, I got a free ticket to see him in Kitchener. Mm-hmm. I got 2 free tickets, so I took my mom. And, we were watching his show.
Yeah.
I mean, who else am I going to take?
Yeah, you don't have any significant others, your mom. And your dad's not interested.
Yeah. If I got a ticket now, I probably wouldn't go.
Okay. Oh, you so would. If you got a Martin Short ticket now, you're like, maybe he's good. But it would be with Steve Martin.
Well, that would sweeten the deal a bit.
Yeah.
Because I like him more than I like Martin Short.
But you went to this concert.
So Martin Short did all of his iconic characters. Jiminy Glick, that guy, Ed Grimley.
Yeah.
I was trying to do the hair.
I was trying to...
the hair that Ed Grimley has.
I was trying to, think, are there Jiminy Glick fans out there? It was the thing that when you would get on the Comedy Network, you'd be like, oh man, not this. And then you go to a different channel.
I think the Jiminy Glick fans are all like powerful showbiz people.
You think that's what, like, because he's bringing truth to power?
It's because, Tom Hanks or somebody saw Jiminy Glick and it's like, that's what I would experience.
Okay, and for people who don't know what Jiminy Glick is, he's like a parody of, what is it?
Like a junket interviewer.
Yeah,
like,
and it's just Martin Short in a big fat suit, like doing like crazy slapstick. The cover of his Jiminy Glick in La La Land cover is like him like leaning back, isn't it, and being like caught by a bunch of people, because that's what he does.
Let's do a Patreon episode on that one.
Oh boy.
But Jiminy Glick, the show was he would interview big showbiz people.
Yeah, did they know it was Martin Short?
Yeah. It was just like Steve Martin and Tom Hanks and all his friends,
Yeah. Well, what you doing? Terrible. Anytime I would follow on that.
So this is a long wait.
Oh, he also did the father of the bride character.
Yeah, that was the last thing.
And the real question is, did he do his Clifford character?
He did not do Clifford.
Okay, well, what's Clifford?
So Clifford was a movie that was shot in 1990 and released in 1994. Because it was so good, they were just saving it for the right time.
And for people that don't know, Clifford's premise is that Martin Short plays how old is he? 10-year-old boy?
10-year-old boy. And he was like 45.
Yeah, and like, I guess Martin Short is a small guy, so he doesn't get on his knees or anything. He's not dwarfing it up.
I think he's dwarfing it up a little bit.
Oh, yeah, maybe a little bit. And he plays up against Charles Grodin, who I don't think we've ever talked about on this, except in the context of the Elaine May episode.
Well, I love Charles Grodin.
We both love Charles Grodin. And it's essentially like, and I checked, and it did come after, or I guess it was made in 1990, maybe it came before, The Problem Child, like that wave of like troublesome kids movies. And it's just Martin Short torturing Charles Grodin. That's the whole movie.
Yeah, so Martin Short is kind of like the bad seed. He's a bad kid who's staying with his uncle, and he really wants to go to this dinosaur-themed theme park in Los Angeles.
But his uncle is too busy trying to create a maquette of the public transportation system that's going to be introduced in Los Angeles, and, complications arise. He doesn't have time for Clifford. So Clifford, oh boy, he starts taking revenge, Problem Child style. Now, I should say, I'd seen this movie. We did a double bill, Clifford and Cabin Boy, and wow, there was never a night with less laughs in the Laser Blast household. I remember we just sat there in stony silence watching all of it. So when Neon Dreams, the series at the Royal Cinema, which is great, run by Brendan Ross, decided to do a 35mm 25th anniversary on Martin Short's birthday.
35mm.
He's 35mm.
That will never happen again.
That will never happen again. Even with an introduction by the director, who I don't recall his name.
I think Paul Flaherty.
Yeah, who is the brother.
Joe's brother, yeah.
And it played to a shockingly full audience. I guess people were nostalgic for Clifford. And I sat down and I was like, you know what? People love this. Like, they love. Maybe there's something that I missed. And I had, because the movie's hilarious.
We laughed all the way through.
All the way through.
So not only does Clifford have revenge on Charles Grodin, he ruins Charles Grodin's life systematically.
And, I mean, Brendan Ross during his introduction, I think it was a little hard on the movie, but it was a good preparation for it, where he's like, there's jokes, but they're not really funny. What's funny is just Martin Short and Charles Grodin's face as these things go on.
Yeah, he said everything is funny in the movie except the jokes.
Yes.
I don't agree, but it is a good setup because, like, you have to prepare yourself for the idea that this very premise. Because when this movie came out in the 90s, critics hated it and they could not get past the fact that Martin Short was a boy.
Half star from Roger Ebert. I believe one of the lines was like, this film should not exist. Essentially, the film is anti-comedy. Like, that's what it is. That it's almost like the premise is so ridiculous that that's what's funny about it, and that's what causes laughs in the audience.
It's so ridiculous, and these two guys are so committed.
Yes.
And they're perfectly complementary performances. Martin Short is, like, insane playing a small boy.
Yeah, just like mugging it up, just rubber face the entire time.
And Charles Grodin, dead straight.
So straight, so serious.
It so real.
Yeah.
The scene near the end when, like, Clifford has finally completely destroyed his life, like, Charles Grodin is about to present this thing.
Don't spoil it, but it just goes wrong.
It goes wrong, and
Grodin's face.
Grodin doesn't mug.
Yeah. And you like, you're watching it and you're like, Charles Grodin's gonna murder Martin Short. That's what the movie's leading up to. There's a scene, I think it's probably the signature scene of the movie, where Charles Grodin is trying to get Martin Short to agree with him after Martin Short has essentially like done so many bad things, and he's like, why can't you just look like a human boy?
Look at me like a human boy. You can't do it.
And Martin Short like just does like 30 reactions like in a row,
just weird faces trying to look human. And it's so funny because it's Martin Short trying to look like a human boy, and Charles Grodin is just talking to him as if he is a boy.
And then he's like, no, you don't get your dinosaur. No, you don't get it.
Or there's one part of that where he's like, now, you tell my girlfriend that we're the best of friends. And then Martin Short goes, we are, aren't we? And he goes, shut up.
It just escalates in a perfect way. The only things that don't work are the weird bookends.
Well, those were added by the studio later.
Oh, you looked into it?
After it tested poorly.
And then it continued to test poorly, and they left it on a shelf.
And, so we saw that video introduction that Paul Flaherty had sent, which was also great, because he framed himself with a David Lean biography in the background.
That made me laugh so much. Do you think that he had some leanish qualities when he made Clifford?
Well, he kept saying, originally we had a scene in the movie where Marty would talk to Patty McCormick, and she made a cameo. And
Patty McCormick being the actor who played the Bad Seed in the movie The Bad Seed as a child.
And we had to cut that scene, and I think if we had left that scene in, people would have understood the premise better.
Nope, because they don't know what Patty McCormick looks like as an adult.
And frankly, if you're not sold on Martin Short as a 10-year-old boy, you're not going to be sold on it at any point.
But can we just talk about a little bit about like the end of the movie, where like it reminded me of things that like a 90s comedy would do that movies now just don't have, where they go to this like insane theme park with dinosaurs and like they're actual robots and stuff that are going towards.
It was like a Ray Harryhausen movie.
Yeah. And like that idea of like that kind of practical tactile feeling to comedies doesn't exist anymore when you make them. Yeah. And it made me kind of sad, but we always have Clifford, which is waiting to be released by the Criterion Collection at any moment, I'm sure.